a frozen weight that seems to press against the very timber of these walls, whispering of things that break under the pressure of the frost. Welcome back to the Midgard Archives, traveler. Take your place by the hearth, pull the furs close, and feel the warmth of the fire as it pushes back the creeping shadows of the north. Step into the light and out of the cold. For tonight, we must speak of a man who was himself a fragment of the North's most jagged history. We are unearthing the case file on Ivar the Boneless, the architect of a nightmare that nearly swallowed England whole. He is a figure who exists in the white-out silence between a physical curse and a strategic masterpiece. A man whose legs could not carry him, but whose mind could move empires. To understand Ivar is to confront an internal void of a man who lived as a paradox. In the modern consciousness, we see him through the lens of the hit series Vikings, portrayed by Alex Hugh Anderson as a charismatic and terrifying force of nature who crawls through the blood and mud of Kattegat to claim a throne of bone and iron. But the historical manuscript presents a figure that is perhaps even more unsettling, because he is less of a monster and more of a clinical, cold strategist. Whether he was a literal cripple or a man whose bonelessness was a metaphor for a different kind of internal void is a question that has haunted the search for the unheard truth for over 1,000 years. The origin of his name is where the myth and the manuscript first begin to clash in a revealing horror of biological mystery. The sagas, specifically the tale of Ragnar's sons, suggest that Ivar's condition was the result of a curse born from the environmental corruption of a broken vow. It is said that his mother, Aslaug, possessed the gift of prophecy and warned Ragnar to wait 3 nights after his return from a long voyage before consummating their marriage. She warned that if he did not wait, the child born of their union would have no bones. Ragnar, consumed by the black gall of his own desires and perhaps feeling the weight of his own legendary status, ignored the warning. The result was Ivar, a child born with cartilage where there should have been bone. A prince who could not stand on his own feet, but who was destined to make the kings of Europe kneel. Modern historians and medical researchers have attempted to apply a scientific shield to this legend, suggesting that Ivar may have suffered from osteogenesis imperfecta, a condition that leaves bones as fragile as glass. In the context of the 9th century, such a survival would be a miracle of sociological shielding, suggesting that Ivar was so highly valued by his family that he was protected, and carried where others would have been abandoned to the elements. However, there is another, more subtle theory within the archives. Some linguists argue that boneless was a mistranslation of the Old Norse word for the hated, or a metaphor for impotence, suggesting that while Ivar could lead men to war, he could never lead a lineage of his own. Yet another theory suggests it referred to his supernatural agility in battle, describing a man who moved with the fluid, skeletal grace of a serpent, appearing to have no bones at all as he dodged the blades of his enemies. In the TV series, Ivar is often portrayed as the youngest and most volatile of the brothers, but the manuscript tells a different story. In many of the oldest accounts, Ivar is described as the eldest and the wisest, the one to whom Buren Ironside and the others looked for the abyssal deep song of leadership. He was the brain of the Great Heathen Army, a continental entity of terror that landed on the shores of East Anglia in 865. While the screen version of Ivar is driven by a chaotic, screamy rage, the historical Ivar was a master of the psychological borderland shield. He understood that terror is most effective when it is applied with clinical precision. When news reached the brothers that their father, Ragnar, had been executed in the snake pit of Northumbria, the sagas say the brothers reacted with visceral grief. Björn Sider gripped his spear so hard his fingerprints were left in the wood, and Ivica crushed a gaming piece until his fingers bled. But Ivar remained still. He was the internal void in the center of the storm. He knew that a direct, emotional assault against King Glar would lead only to a shallow grave. Instead, he opted for a slow, agonizing search for the unheard advantage. The curiosa of Ivar's strategy during the invasion of Northumbria remains one of the greatest legends of the Viking Age. After an initial failed skirmish, Ivar approached King Gley, not with a sword, but with a diplomatic, scientific shield. He claimed he wanted no part in the blood feud of his brothers and asked only for a small plot of land as compensation for his father's death. He asked for only as much land as a single oxhide could cover. The king, thinking him a weakling and a fool, agreed. Ivar then took a massive oxhide and soaked it until it was supple. He cut the hide into a single, continuous thread so thin it was like a spider's web. He then stretched this thread across the landscape, encircling the entire area that would become the Norse stronghold of York. By the time the king realized he had been deceived, Ivar had established a sociological shield that the Anglo-Saxons could not break. The fall of York and the subsequent execution of King Ella is where the revealing horror of the Viking legend reaches its peak. The TV show depicts the Blood Eagle as a screaming spectacle of gore. However, as we look deeper into the manuscript, we find a debate that divides the archives. Some scholars believe the Blood Eagle was a literal ritual of human sacrifice to Odin, while others argue it was a linguistic, environmental corruption. They suggest that later Christian chroniclers misread skaldic metaphors about eagles tearing at the backs of the fallen, turning a poetic description of a battlefield into a literal, mechanical torture. Whether it happened in the flesh or only in the ink of the monks, the result was the same. The internal void left by the death of the Northumbrian kings allowed Ivar to reshape the map of England. Moving beyond the shores of England, the manuscript links Var to a figure known in the Irish annals as Imar. This Imar was the king of the Northmen of all Ireland and Britain, a man who founded a dynasty that would rule Dublin for centuries. This version of Ivar was a true continental entity, a king who managed the Black Gaul of Palace intrigue in Ireland, while simultaneously coordinating the movements of the Great Heathen Army in England. He was a master of the geological leer, knowing exactly which coastal ports to seize and which rivers to turn into highways for his dragon ships. One of the most profound pieces of curiosa regarding Ivar is the legend of his burial. Unlike his father, who died in a pit of serpents, or his brother Björn, who sits in a mound in Sweden, Ivar's final act was to turn his own body into a scientific shield for the land he had conquered. The sagas claim that, as he grew old, Ivar ordered that he be buried in a mound on the coast of England. He prophesied that as long as his bones remained intact and watched the sea, no invader would ever be able to successfully conquer the island. For 200 years, it was said that his skeletal presence held the white-out silence of the borderland. The legend concludes with a revealing horror during the Norman conquest of 1066. It is said that William the Conqueror, hearing of the spell of the Boneless, ordered the mound to be opened. Upon finding Ivar's body, remarkably preserved and undecayed, William ordered the remains to be burned to ashes and cast into the sea. Only then, once the guardian's bones were gone, could the Normans claim the throne. In comparing the screen to the saga, we see that the TV series gave us a man who was a prisoner of his own body, a character who fought to prove he was a god because he feared he was a monster. But the real Ivar of the manuscript was a man who'd already transcended his body. He was a king of the mind, a strategist who understood that power is not about the strength of the legs, but about the reach of the vision. He was the hearth-fire shield for his people, and the black gall in the veins of his enemies. The lure of Ivar lies in his survival against the abyssal indifference of a world that should have discarded him. He was a man who turned his lack of bones into a brand of terror. He didn't just participate in the Viking Age. He directed it like a conductor of a dark symphony. His legacy is one of the search for the unheard truth, a reminder that the most dangerous weapon in the Norse arsenal wasn't the axe, but the relentless, calculating mind of a man who had nothing to lose and a world to gain. The historical curiosa doesn't stop with his death. In 1686, a farm laborer in Repton discovered a burial mound that contained the remains of a giant, surrounded by the bones of over 200 warriors. Many believe this was the final scientific shield of Ivar the Boneless, as Repton was a known winter camp for the Great Heathen Army. The skeleton was nearly 9 feet tall, suggesting that the Boneless moniker might have also been a play on his immense, terrifying stature. A man so tall, his bones seemed to belong to another world entirely. As the fire in our archive begins to settle into glowing embers, we must acknowledge the internal void that Ivar leaves behind. He remains one of the most successful Vikings to ever sail, yet he is the one we understand the least. He is a search for the unheard truth that leads us into the darkest corners of the human spirit, a place where pain is forged into a weapon, and where a man with no bones can become the pillar of a nation. The archives are closing for tonight, but the search for the unheard truth is far from over. If the story of the Whispering Bone has served as your hearth-fire shield against the white-out silence of the night, please ensure you stay within our circle. Subscribe to the Midgard Archives to be the first to hear our next entry, where we unearth the case file on the Shield Maiden, whose name became a synonym for the fierce spirit of the North, the real Lagertha. Leave your testimony in the comments and share your thoughts. Was Ivar a cursed child of a broken vow? Or was he a strategic genius who used the sociological shield of his own disability to hide a mind sharper than any sword?